Periodization. It's probably something you've heard of before, but in various corners of the fitness world, it tends to cause a lot of confusion, but it shouldn't. When understood and applied, it can be extremely valuable in helping us smash through plateaus, hit our fitness goals, and keep our training effective. So today we're going to break this idea down into its simplest component parts and understand how we can get the most out of periodization in our calisthenics training. How you doing, Cali Crowd? Today we're talking all things periodization, and jumping straight in to start us off, let's talk about what periodization even is. Simply put, it is planned variation in training intensity and volume over the medium term, but with a specific long-term goal in mind. And generally, the concept of periodization is the same in calisthenics as it is in any other mode of training, but there are subtle differences that make the application to bodyweight training a little bit more interesting, but more on that later in the video. Periodization was popularized by Russian physiologist Leo Matveyev in the mid-20th century with the aim to get athletes to peak competitive conditioning using phases of training called cycles. If you've heard of periodization before, you've probably heard of the terms of macro, meso, and micro cycles. And if you haven't, I'll quickly explain what they are. Macro cycles reflect your long-term goals, for example, what you want to achieve in a year. Mesocycles reflect your more medium-term goals, 1 to 3 months, and multiple mesocycles make up a macrocycle. Microcycles detail your methodology down to your immediate term, weekly, fortnightly, and multiple microcycles make up a mesocycle. With me so far? Maybe an example would illustrate this better. Imagine for a second you want to get ready for the Olympics. This is your macro cycle, your long-term goal. The mesocycles for this could be broken down into, say, a preparation mesocycle where you do lots of light work to get you ready to start your next mesocycle, targeting some hypertrophy training focused on muscle growth. Then a general strength building phase in another mesocycle, using that muscle that you just built to build strength for your sport. Followed by a mesocycle dedicated to maximal strength and training at super maximal levels, really pushing yourself beyond your current limits. And finally, you don't want to be killing yourself just before or during a competition, so you have a competition readiness phase, where the aim is to simply maintain the strength and muscle that you have acquired to that point. The benefit we have as general athletes is that we're not looking to hit peak performance at a specific time. We broadly just want to become fitter and stronger, which means we don't have to dial back our training just because we have some sort of competition coming up in a few weeks. But if we aren't competitive athletes, what is the point of doing this periodization nonsense? Well, our bodies love specificity and typically respond well to a narrower scope of goals than trying to get everything in one go. And many people have broad, really unrefined goals that might create conflict even if we don't know it at that point in time. For example, take a common calisthenics objective that I hear a lot. I want to learn how to do 10 pull-ups. At a high level, this seems pretty straightforward, but when broken down, there are various mini goals captured in this ambition. You may need to build muscle so that you have the capacity to lift more weight. Maybe you need to lose fat and get lighter to make this goal more achievable. You'll need to build strength, specifically strength in vertical pulling. And you actually may get to a point of 2 or 3 pull-ups. Then you need to build up the endurance to be able to do more. All of these mini goals require different methods of training to hit them optimally, and trying to clear all of these hurdles simultaneously will get you nowhere fast. Periodization aims to break each of these quote-unquote mini goals into mesocycles, where each component part can be tackled and the long-term goal is ultimately achieved, in this case, doing 10 pull-ups. It should be noted that if you are a beginner and you haven't been training consistently for at least a year, your time will be spent better not worrying about periodization. Beginners benefit from newbie gains, and it has been proven time and time and again that untrained individuals can extract phenomenal gains from almost any training stimulus. And periodization becomes significantly more important the more we move towards intermediate and advanced stages of our athletic performance. But that being said, how do you use periodization to your advantage in your day-to-day training? Well, to start off with, know what your goal is and contrast it with where you are now today. Somebody who sets a macro goal to learn how to back lever and is comfortable on the bar will have a very different set of mesocycles to somebody with the same goal that can barely string together a pull-up. Knowing your goal will allow you to figure out what you need to do to get there, aka your mesocycles. Typically in calisthenics, this will mean getting stronger and maybe getting lighter, but strength has a positive correlation to muscle mass, so it's a bit of a conundrum. On the one hand, you have building more muscle so that you can get stronger, and on the other hand, you need to be lighter so that you can actually perform the skill that you're looking to learn. This is the fine balance that we see a lot in calisthenics training. Once you figure out what your mesocycles are and figure out what you have to do in them to make progress towards your macro goal, you'll need to break that down into what exercises will help you get there. The volume and intensity of these exercises will define your microcycles. And here we want to be specific. Build the muscles that will help develop the strength you need to train movements that relate to the skill you want to learn. And staying on this point, this order of mesocycles is very important. We can only achieve the skill we're after once we have the strength to do it. And we can only get the strength to do it once we have built up the relevant muscles to the necessary condition. And research supports that this sequencing is key to getting the most out of periodization protocols. This is actually one of the areas where calisthenics has a big advantage to typical weight training, in that we can progressively overload our exercises in way more creative ways than simply adding weight. So what could a periodized calisthenics program look like? What's a practical example? Well, here's a real example from me learning how to frog to handstand. This was a goal that I set myself that took me over a year to achieve, and this would represent my macro cycle. This was a particularly interesting macro cycle because the skill acquisition aspect of handstanding was very important and had to be integrated with every aspect of training along the whole journey. I spent a large part of the first 3 months focusing on general pushing capacity, high volumes, working in the 10 to 12 rep range, push-ups, dips, pike push-ups, developing the hypertrophy and building the relevant muscles that would allow me to take the next mesocycle to its full potential, which was focused on building applicable strength. In this mesocycle, I spent about 2 months working on specific strength for the frog to handstand. 4 to 6 rep range was what was worked here. I spent a lot of microcycles in this mesocycle focused on quality and repetitive skill work to build up familiarity with the frog to handstand movement. Then I had a mesocycle focused only on developing maximal strength, working beyond my limits. A lot of negatives, eccentrics, and 1 rep maxes in this mesocycle. And I kept this mesocycle very short because negatives and 1 rep maxes every other day is just unsustainable. And these 3 mesocycles were essentially repeated, adding intensity as I went until I achieved the full frog to handstand 374 days later. Now, the question then becomes, is all this periodization necessary? In a hypothetical example, could I, say, just have tried the frog to handstand over and over again until I achieved it? And the honest answer is, yeah, probably. I don't doubt that the frog to handstand gains would have eventually come, but imagine the amount of time it would have taken to develop this movement just by doing singular attempts over and over again, not to mention how boring that would have been. Ultimately, periodization is just a tool to drive focus and specificity, which we know supercharge gains. By tackling huge goals 1 step at a time, we can put the pieces together and get something bigger than the component parts. But guys, I want to know what you think. What has been your experience with periodization in calisthenics? Is this something that you've heard of before? Let me know down in the comment section below, and guys, I will see you in the next one.